and it is 6 o'clock according to my iPhone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I will share my screen. All right. Are you able to see the beginning of the presentation? Great, thank you. Okay. So I'd like to start off by reminding our viewers that interpretation services are available, and I'd like our interpreter go ahead and unmute and share that message with our viewers.
Sí, buenas tardes a todos. Queríamos hacerles saber que los servicios de interpretación van a estar disponibles para esta junta y taller el día de hoy. Gracias.
Thank you very much. All right, here we are at session 5 of 6, plus a special board meeting to be held in April or May. Thank you all for joining us yet again. The meeting format is still the same. We are live streaming currently, and this is recorded so that it can be shared on the website and shared with anybody who would like to view it at a later date. If you're just joining us for the first time, please know that all of our prior sessions and all of the supporting materials are located on our NVUSD website so that you can go back and access all the presentations and information that this group here has been a part of since the beginning. And for tonight's agenda, we are trying very hard to get you into your group work very promptly so that you can continue where you left off last week. But we do have some additional information to share and a few new scenarios. So we're going to try to go through that quickly, but give you again the bulk of the work to be with your small groups. So we'll start by summarizing some of the themes from our community input. We had between our last session, where we looked at the first of 6 scenarios. We had 2 community input sessions, one in English and one in Spanish. We also have received many emails from the general public, from teachers, from staff members, from parents, students. And so we have distilled those into a summary that we will share some of the bigger themes that have emerged in those communications. Dr. Massetti is going to follow up with some remarks about some of those themes as well. And then we're going to introduce some new scenarios. A lot of these scenarios are from the members of this group, and so they will have the opportunity to be able to speak to those scenarios, explain them, and then hopefully have a little time to answer questions for clarity. From there, we'll move into our small group work, and then finally, again, come together at the very end to see how we're doing, what kind of progress we're making. So tonight's norms are the same as they have been, procedural norms. We're really going to try to hit hard on the start and end time, especially as we proceed through our agenda here in the large group, again, so we can save time for your small group discussions. And we do ask that when you get to the discussion, you're aware of how much time that you're asking questions or providing commentary and allowing other people to have space and time to share their ideas and to ask questions and clarify. In this larger group, if you have a question, please feel free to use your raise hand button to let us know that you have a question so we can stop and acknowledge it and answer it. And otherwise, please stay on mute so that we can be listening and hear everybody clearly. And if you need to get up at any time and take a break, please do so. So in general, you guys have been doing a great job of staying engaged, asking amazing questions. And I know that you're doing lots of integration of all the ideas and information. In fact, I know it doesn't stop here during this session. You all are continuing to think about this information and think about ideas and ways to solve these problems. And we really appreciate the work and the great thinking that you're doing. So continue on with that. Keep your mind open to diverse ideas. We're getting new scenarios to take a look at and utilize what you need to make good decisions for yourself. Stay on task and let's realize that we're doing very hard work. It can be very emotional, but we need to make clear that we are working on a problem and we're all trying to come to the best solution that we possibly can. All right, with that, I'm going to transition to talking about some of the themes that we heard through the community town halls and through emails. So there were 10 key themes. The first one was about considering the impact of closure on the community. So it was kind of a general plea from commentators to take into account the broader impact of what the loss of a school means for a school community. So while we have to talk about numbers, the numbers of students, the numbers of dollars that are being spent, the number of empty seats, the number of facilities we have, these commentators did not want us to lose sight of the non-quantifiable impacts of the school that you lose, the history, the traditions, the connections, the identity, and the sense of belonging that a school provides its students, families, and staff. Another theme was around equity. And while equity is listed as one of the equally important criteria on our rubric, on our guiding principles, some have argued that a new set of principles with equity interwoven in all the criteria should be used. Either way, the theme of providing consideration of communities in most need was shared many times and is important to consider. Another theme was, keep up speaking and doing the slides at the same time. The third theme was disruption and disrupting too many schools. There was a sense of discomfort that emerged with some of the scenarios which seemed to produce too much disruption, particularly scenario C, which would have merged two dual language immersion elementary programs into one, along with closure of middle schools. You will see some new scenarios tonight that provide options that do not involve consolidation of elementary schools in response to that feedback. Another theme was the view of the school as the center of the community. So a reminder that schools often provide more than just a place students go to class. They also provide before and after school care, resources and information to students and families, a space for parents and families to gather and host community events. For many families, it is their main avenue of connection to the broader community, the city, and the valley, and the first place that they may go for support. Then theme 5, we had a lot of people who spoke and emailed to provide a voice of advocacy for their specific school site, and please to keep it open. We heard the love and admiration they had for their school, for the people and for its programs. And some were understandably very uncomfortable to propose any other suggestions or alternative schools to close, but they left us with their hopeful plea that we wouldn't have to close any schools and maybe find some other solution. Unfortunately, the reality of declining enrollment and the need to right-size our facilities to match the size of our enrollment really can't be ignored, or all students will suffer from inadequate resources being used inefficiently. I'll stop there to see if there's anything else that I am missing from 1 through 5 from anybody who reviewed those emails. I don't see any hands, so I'm going to go ahead. All right. The 6th theme was about transportation. The problem of how students would get to school if they could no longer walk a short distance came up. People asked questions about the kind of transportation that could and would be provided, as well as the cost of transportation, and whether there were significant differences among the various scenarios in terms of transportation and cost. Overall, commentators challenged the district to be sure to include solutions for transportation in any redesign plan. There was some specific advocacy of programming for middle school students that focused on social emotional learning and the opportunity to make connections within tight-knit schools, tight-knit school communities, and then also the affirmation of benefits of programs which develop and celebrate bilingualism and biliteracy. With regard to dual immersion programs, there were repeated requests to strengthen the middle years and high school years, particularly of the DLI program. And there were suggestions to expand at the elementary level. We heard a theme of ensuring that the dual immersion program had room to grow wherever it was. And finally, we received many emails from families interested in a TK through 8th grade pilot. The basic premise is that a TK-8 school could provide a much smaller environment in the middle years for students and families looking for that kind of experience for their student. We did not include this proposal as a scenario for consideration at this point because erecting a K-8 or a TK-8 alone does not solve the problem of too many empty seats at the middle school that, schools that we already have. So while we didn't include it as a scenario, we recognize that this is a potential programmatic option that we can explore with the elementary communities once we have a plan which does address the closure and consolidation aspects of the redesign process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Massetti, who's going to provide some reflections and comments of her own.
Great. Thank you, Dana, and welcome everyone. Thanks for being with us again this evening. As the superintendent who commissioned this task force, I believe it's important for me to make a statement post the community input sessions and before all of you as task force participants launch into the rigorous, difficult work of evaluating scenarios during these final sessions. First of all, I would like to thank you all again for your commitment to our kids and the Napa Valley Unified School District. This work is not easy by any means. As you and the public have observed during the task force work sessions and the community input nights, as we discuss school closure and consolidation on a large scale, it becomes clear that schools are places in the community where broader societal issues intersect. When my team and I led elementary school closure process back in the fall of 2019, I needed to remind everyone of an important fact, and I'm going to provide the same reminder here tonight. Declining enrollment, which becomes the driver for having to make the difficult decision of closing schools, is a symptom of a much bigger problem. NVUSD is not in this position because of what's happened in the community just over the last couple of years. NVUSD is in this difficult position because of decades of decision-making. When declining enrollment hits a school district like it did ours starting a decade ago, again, it's a symptom of a larger set of challenges. Lack of affordable housing, cost of living, and economic disparity in our community are the actual root causes of declining enrollment. School districts actually become the victims when the broader community fails to address affordable housing, cost of living, and economic disparity, because these are the issues that trigger the declining enrollment in schools. And often when a school district has to finally respond to the impacts of declining enrollment by enacting a potential school closure in the way that we find ourselves here this evening, the expectation is that the school district fulfill its mission to educate and to also try and address these large-scale problems in the community. I encourage and urge that you get involved and advocate for your city council and board of supervisors to address these issues. NVUSD is not necessarily the public agency that can solve these issues in our community, nor will we ever be able to stem the hemorrhaging decline in student enrollment if cost of living and lack of affordability continue to be ignored in the Valley. Our mission as a school district is to educate, and we need to make decisions that ensure the district can provide the best education to all its children, whether it's the 17,000 students we serve today or the less than 15,000 students we're projected to serve in 5 years. Having to right-size the district is a direct result of families having to leave the area because of issues like housing and cost of living, which are not issues that NVUSD has too much control over. So please do not cease with your advocacy and your activism in this space. Please help our district by pushing on your city council members and board of supervisors to address these issues more promptly and aggressively. As you've learned, these community challenges impact the educational journey of the children in our schools. Secondly, there's been lots of questioning whether or not my team or I have any consciousness about the impacts of these decisions on our community. Some have asked questions like, have you thought about the walkability factor to school for our kids and families who are furthest from opportunity and most in need? Have you thought about our working families and those in our community who are most impacted by the economic disparities that exist in the Valley? What about the transportation burden? Have you thought about what it would mean if a school did not exist as a community hub in a given neighborhood? The answer is yes. As a team, we think about, struggle, and discuss these impacts on a daily basis. In fact, it might be helpful to know that we even think about them through a personal lived experience. As your first female Latinx superintendent of schools, I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants, both who worked outside the home 12 to 14 hours a day. My caretaker was my Cuban grandmother, mi abuela, who never learned English, who never learned how to drive, who actually worked in the fields in rural Cuba and never got an education past the primary grades. She walked my brother and I to school every day during our primary years. And then when she had to go work in downtown Los Angeles to iron clothes at a factory to close our family's economic gaps, she couldn't walk us to school anymore. And we were dropped off very early at our campus at 7:30 in the morning. We were the first ones there and picked up in the evenings when either one of my parents or some extended family members could get us. Assistant Superintendent Pat Andrew Jennings, your first female African-American senior leader in NVUSD, lived in a community where the district enacted a desegregation plan for its elementary schools, which led to her having to be bused out of her neighborhood to a school where people on our school campus did not look like her. And again, as a middle school student, her local middle school closed and the closest middle school was miles away. These lived experiences result in a true understanding of the impact felt by students and families due to a school closure and a commitment to specifically address the resulting needs. So yes, we have the consciousness. In fact, we have also actually taught and led in school settings that were majority communities of color with free and reduced lunch rates of over 90%. So the lens around equity is strongly present through both personal and professional lived experiences. Our team also has a deep commitment to the Napa Valley Unified School District. Let me remind you that both Ms. Dana Page and Mr. Pearson have decades of longstanding ties to the district. It is those broader experiences coupled with the deep commitment to NVUSD that have provided my team the courage to illuminate these difficult issues from the onset of our work back in July of 2018. It's our willingness to lean into these issues from the onset of it's our willingness to lean into these issues that has ensured that our school board has a depth of understanding of the difficult decisions that need to be made. If the senior leadership team and the Board of Education fail to respond to declining enrollment and refuse to deal with the facilities and financial impacts of the decline, like in our neighboring Vallejo City Unified School District and the not too far away Oakland Unified School District, that have both struggled in doing so for now multiple decades, generations of students are impacted through state receivership, where the local community loses control of the district and state administrators come in to call all the shots. That reality is difficult while you are living it, and recovering from it takes years, if even ever possible. Who suffers the most in these situations where facilities and finances have been managed poorly and a state administrator sets the direction for the district from a far distance? Usually our most vulnerable students, our students who are the furthest from opportunity. Not just students at one particular school, but rather students across the district. School closure and consolidation is absolutely not popular. In fact, I have colleague superintendents who have told me that they would leave the position first before having to actually do the hard work of closing schools. For 10 years, this district had declining enrollment, and because of a failure to really use data to drive decision-making, the following 5 key events happened before I arrived here, but have required our teams and the full board's attention to correct and respond to. Number 1, small elementary schools of less than 200 students were still being operated. The schools were predominantly open enrolled, that means non-resident students attended, and did not reflect the district's broader demographic, with very small numbers of Latinx and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. Just as a side note, and as an example, previous administrations had attempted multiple times to close Yountville Elementary, but were never able to execute on the closure. I get it. As I led through the elementary school closure process, there was a lot of political pressure from Yountville to not close the school in that town. 2 months later, Yountville Elementary was closed despite political pressures because it was the right thing to do for the entire district. Number two, the district used nearly $40 million of Measure H funds to build a brand new facility for a small charter school, that being River School, instead of using those capital improvement funds to take care of the several campuses of its traditional district schools in the city of Napa that are in complete disrepair, including Harvest Middle School, but also many others. Upon my arrival in my first couple weeks on the job, I asked so many questions of so many people about how this happened and sought an explanation. The answers remained very unclear. As a side note, I also wondered how the decision was justified when the school by no means reflected the district's broader demographic, serving mostly white students to the exclusion of English learners, Latinx, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and special education students. Those of you who are organizing now around the facilities and equities, many of you on this very task force, I wish the energy had been funneled to demand something different then, when the $30 to $40 million was actually available to make facilities improvements at our schools in most disrepair for our students most in need through a more equitable approach. Number three, in my inquiries about this unusual facilities decision that didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time, it caused me to drill down on how the district was managing in its role as a charter authorizer. I unveiled that the two dependent charter schools, being NVLA and River Middle School, were both taking the revenue for the students attending their schools, which is completely appropriate because that's how charter schools work. But the district was not fully charging them the cost of operating both these schools, which means that the Napa Valley Unified School District was subsidizing these charter schools out of the general fund at the expense of all other students enrolled in all of our non-charter traditional district schools, which is really unfair, inequitable, and non-compliant. Number four, simultaneously, the district was also committed to building a second middle school in American Canyon, despite the massive declining enrollment trajectory in front of them, which would have caused even more unmanageable economic pressures. And we would have found ourselves in even more complicated circumstances that we are in today at this moment, figuring out how to use another brand new facility that we really did not need, but cannot shut down because we just poured tens of millions of taxpayer dollars into the project. And finally, amidst all of this, when I arrived and all of these issues were being unveiled, the district was operating with a 3.4% reserve. Please remember that the state minimal requirement is 3%. That's right above the state requirement, which really means that the district was only one bad decision or incident away from bankruptcy. Please rest assured, a school district going bankrupt is not good for kids. Why do I share this tonight before you get to work in your small groups? The district leadership and the Board of Education cannot be myopic in our thinking as we address and fix these large-scale problems and inequities while dealing with the impacts of these past decisions. We must look at the entire picture. When we think about community impact, it's easy if you're just tuning into these complex problems, maybe through your participation on this task force, for example, to start generating solutions that may respond to just one piece of this complex puzzle. However, the senior team, the trustees, and myself have to understand the entire complex puzzle at all times. In order to do that, we need to be data-driven. I know there's lots of concerns, and they're valid concerns, about the disproportionate impacts of what school we close. But if we look at the data, here's the bottom line. Our three large comprehensive middle schools all reflect the broader demographic of the community. When we enacted the Yountville and Mount George school closures in the fall of 2019, one of our key strategies was to disrupt the least amount of students and families while also examining demographics and the actual enrollment counts. When it comes to a decision about any of our middle schools, with the exception of River Middle School, you will see that all 3 comprehensive middle schools reflect the community's demographic at large. All 3 of our large comprehensive middle schools have a significant number of students who need us to close the opportunity gap for them. For this reason, we will take a few minutes to share data points that are critical for consideration as you move into the small groups to assess the previous scenarios we reviewed and the new ones you'll learn about tonight from staff and some of our task force participants who submitted great ideas. Before doing that, I want to recognize that this work can feel divisive and uncomfortable, but ultimately we are all in this together. We need to make the best decision possible, considering the big picture and all the guiding principles we've laid out as criterion to inform your work. Choosing to only focus on one data set and ignore other critical data sets will not render the best decision for the district. I ask that we come together and advance the best, most viable solution that will allow us to move forward and bring equity and educational excellence to all of our students in NVUSD while addressing the urgent facilities and financial challenges we currently face. So let's revisit some data points as we consider the impact of the various scenarios you will be evaluating this evening in your small groups, given that the theme of impact has come up repeatedly throughout this task force process. Dana, can you please advance the slides? So it's important to remember, as I stated in my reflections and comments, that we want to look at the number of residents that live in a particular attendance boundary for each of our middle schools. As a reminder, River has 0 students that live in an attendance boundary because it's a completely open enrolled school. Harvest has 485 students that live in the attendance boundary. Silverado has 639 students that live in the attendance boundary. And Redwood, as you can see, has the most, 738 students that live in the attendance boundary. Residents, not non-residents, open enrolled students. Please advance the slide, Dana. Again, thinking about impact, we want to think about the Latinx student counts for our Napa area middle schools. River has 168 Latinx students that attend at River. Silverado has 502 Latinx students that attend. Harvest has 525 Latinx students that attend. And Redwood has 534 Latinx students that attend there. Next slide, Dana. When thinking about impact, it's critical to think about our English learners. These are the English learner counts for Napa area middle schools. River has 48 English learners that attend. Redwood has 192 English learners that attend. Silverado has 219 English learners that attend, and Harvest has 233 English learners that attend that site. Next slide. Thinking about impact, looking at the number of students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged at each of our Napa area middle schools. River has 136 students. Harvest has 435 socioeconomically disadvantaged students. Redwood has 449 socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and Silverado has 498. One topic that we didn't bring up in our data session during session 2, which we thought was relevant as we reflected in response to the community impact, was the consideration of the number of special education students. The students with IEPs, that's the individualized education plan. So looking at those numbers for our Napa area middle schools. River has 37 students with IEPs that attend. Harvest has 68 students with IEPs who attend. Silverado has 100 students with IEPs who attend. And Redwood has 150 students with IEPs who attend that school. So thank you for your time tonight. I'm going to toss it back to Dana, who's going to introduce the new scenarios.
All right, thank you very much. So just doing a quick time check here because we want to make sure that we not only have time to share the scenarios, but we also have a little time for clarification. So we're doing well here. We have a little extra time to make sure we do that. I'm going to go ahead and invite the presenter for scenario E, Educación Excelencia, to go ahead and present this scenario.
This is Miss Laura Cerruti, right, Laura?
Yes, thank you. Before I introduce myself, I would first like to acknowledge the generous folks, both on and off the task force, with whom I consulted before coming to my scenario. I want to thank especially Orlando Carrion and Alejandro Guerrero for their work on the guiding principles, Katie Kensock for her ideas on a Harvest Middle School DLI Academy, and Catherine Fleming and Dane Knutson for some general feedback. My name is Laura Cerruti. I'm a parent of a first and third grader at Pueblo Vista. I also work at UC Davis, where I am well aware that California does not have enough children on track to go to college and fill the jobs that we will need in our economy. In 2017, only 39% of Latinx 19-year-olds had completed a college-ready curriculum with C or better, compared to 52% of white students. That's a 13% gap. More than 50% of California's K-12 students are Latinx, so equity gaps have a real consequence for our future. Equity needs to be embedded throughout all of this task force's guiding principles. And where in the guidelines is community stewardship and leadership? Generations from now, will we remember that we saved $2 million or that we decimated Latinx communities when we could have instead promoted their social mobility? I believe it is possible to make a good decision that is both equitable and fiscally responsible. But a decision that is not equitable is also not fiscally responsible or responsible use of facilities. I hope we will take the time to go back a step and discuss and agree on the guidelines on which we will base our very important decision. Schools in low-income communities are tremendously important anchors where our children are fed and cared for, community connections are made, and civic values are instilled. Let us not have that kind of narrow vision that constrains us from fully investing in mission-critical neighborhood, school, community centers. As one community member pointed out, if you take away Harvest, the only other shiny public institution left in the neighborhood is juvenile hall. 90-10 dual language immersion programs are effective for all children, such that privileged white parents like myself will transport their English-speaking children many miles to schools in boundaries serving marginalized communities. At DLI schools, Spanish-speaking children are the experts, teaching their peers and about their language and culture, building academic, social, and cultural confidence. The success of the MVLA and Pueblo Vista programs might look easy, but it is not. Other models have failed where these programs collectively have over 22 years of success, having intentionally established culturally sustaining models in neighborhoods where they can work. Closing Harvest and breaking up our 2 dual language immersion schools would be a huge blow to our Latinx communities and the neighborhoods that they knit together. It is not enough to keep Harvest open. The district must repair past harms and double down on its efforts around equity and social mobility. Investment in DLI schools will serve as a restorative to a California community that has had to endure segregated K-12 schools and decades of denial by law of bilingual and culturally responsive education. This is an important moment to commit to strong DLI schools and to ensure that they are located where there are no barriers to access, like our own Highway 29 or other long distances. Expanding, not foreclosing access to DLI programs at more kindergarten locations would strengthen our dual language immersion middle and high school programming at Harvest and Napa High. River's location in North Napa simply does not work for dual language immersion. I did not come into this process with any allegiance toward Harvest Middle School. Exploring the deep history that has brought us to this point has convinced me that there is no equitable solution that involves the closing of Harvest Middle School. I cannot help but notice how community perception shapes the way particular schools are treated and talked about. If we can disparage a particular school, we can eventually build a case for its elimination. I would even suggest that this bias can seep into our interpretation of supposedly hard numbers, such as estimates of capital capital improvement costs. A long line of decisions made over many years may lead all of us, even those of us who know better, to feel that closing Harvest is inevitable, but it does not have to be so. I'm afraid I'm not so much presenting a scenario as I am a path forward. I now have enough information to know that we should not close Harvest or relocate our current DLI schools. Let's now bring the same level of investigation to the other 3 middle schools and their programmatic pathways. I know we can bring equity to this decision for a more sustainable future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Laura. So just for clarity's sake, the scenario that Laura's presenting is to close Redwood Middle School, add 6th grade to Pueblo Vista, make River a residence school, create a community center or kind of a gathering place at Harvest Middle School for the DLI program, and expand DLI to another elementary site. We have about 2 minutes for any clarifying questions of this particular scenario. Does anybody need some clarification on what this scenario entails?
Dana, do you want me to call on hands?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Jen.
Hi, 2 clarifying questions. One of them is, what is a cost, if any, associated with expanding a DLI program to another elementary school? And the second one being, previously, Mike Pearson talked about needing to build a stage at Harvest in order to make it equitable with the other middle schools. If we created a community center at Harvest, is it safe to say that we would need to do that at River and Silverado as well to keep them equitable per that standard?
I'm not sure if I can answer those questions. I would ask the district if they would have those answers. I wouldn't have those numbers.
Well, I can just jump in and then I toss to Mike. The community center would have to clearly come at a cost if we're talking beyond just using the rooms at the facility. So there would be some cost depending on plans and, you know, how elaborate that gets. I don't know, Mike, if you want to chime in there.
Trying. Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute. I think it's a matter of, you know, where we are as a district. I think we are looking at the fact that we have discrepancies from one school site to the other. And I think we're trying to, you know, mitigate school sites comparing one another to each other. I mean, there's going to be subtle differences no matter what. But I do think that would be something we would need to consider. I think it's also important to note that if there was a community center that was built at Harvest Middle School, or if it was built at Silverado or at Redwood, it would have to be DSA compliant because we would be putting you know, students in those particular facilities at one time or another. They're on our campuses, and so that does come, as I explained earlier, it comes with an extra expense because you have to meet DSA expectations out there. It's not that they're insurmountable, but it does happen, and it does come up with these ideas about creating an additional space on a particular school campus.
The other part of the question was with respect to the cost of starting another elementary school DLI. The last one, Pueblo Vista, when it started, was the recipient of magnet funds in order to assist with that. I don't know the total amount that was spent over the 5-year time period to do professional development, recruiting and rebranding, curriculum. But I don't know if Pat or Rob or somebody has a recollection of the total grant amount. Maybe Helen, you were on this call. That would give us a ballpark at least.
The Pueblo Vista received about $1 million over a 3-year period to implement the program that we have.
Thank you.
It was 3 to 5 years.
And that was extramural funds? That was
Magnet grant.
Extra federal monies. They're grant dollars that have to be applied for.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to our next scenario.
There's some other hands raised, Dana. I don't know if we
Well, I
don't have
think
time. Okay.
We need to get through all of the scenarios, and then we can go
Okay.
back if we have other additional clarifications. We can
Okay.
do that, but I want to make sure we get through all our scenarios, and then we'll circle back.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. All right, so scenario 2, in E2 is close Redwood Middle School and add a 6th grade at Puebla Vista. And who is the presenter for this scenario?
This is Ms. Fleming.
Yes.
Okay. Ms.
Thank you,
Fleming,
Dr.
have
Musetti.
5 minutes. I'll give you a 1-minute warning when we get close. Okay. Go
I'll
ahead.
talk fast. Great, thank you. So good evening, my name is Catherine Fleming. This scenario is very similar to scenario E1, which you just heard from Laura, as well as actually the original district proposed scenario B2. The key fiscal savings of this scenario is closing a middle school, specifically Redwood Middle School. This scenario also proposes to add the 6th grade to Puebla Vista. The intent was to keep all of the dual language immersion students in a single middle school cohort of 7th and 8th grades. I actually since learned that NVLA might not have 6th grade anymore, so I guess that scenario would be revisited at that point. I would believe this scenario meets all of the goals that we have agreed upon as a task force. For program excellence, it keeps intact existing DLI programs, the 2 DLI elementary schools tying together in the final grade level offered. The data provided by the district showed that many students are opting out of DLI at the middle school level. It can take longer than just kindergarten through 5th grade to establish a strong DLI foundation and its benefits. Therefore, I was arguing for 6th grade at the DLI schools. This could only be temporary until both schools have fully established a culture continuing in the DLI pathway. Prior to this past year, Harvest was a language academy where every student took Spanish, whether they were in the DLI program or not. Therefore, the performance of our DLI programs and the language offerings clearly demonstrate that we can further program excellence by investing more deeply in these programs. It achieves the goal that the district laid out of saving $2 million in ongoing costs. In terms of facility management, all of the middle schools that we were presented with had the same amount of capital needs. While Harvest showed extra costs related to district wish lists around equity, there was a new gym built in 2011. The track and field area was added in 2012. And when you look at the SARCs, which are submitted to the state, it actually has more ratings of good than Redwood Middle School does. Which brings us to equity. We all know that closing any school is hard, and I'm echoing Dr. Musetti here too. I think we all know that. It impacts the neighborhood, the school, the community, the city, the county, the district overall. There are no real winners in the immediate after effects of a closure. The leadership of this district are experts in their fields, and I do not claim to have any of their knowledge or experience. As members of this task force, we bring knowledge of our lived experiences in these communities, knowledge of our children, and the hopes and the vision of the city and community we want to live in. Like all of us, I want my children to grow up in a community that supports those who have the least options, that truly follows the principles of equity, reducing barriers, providing opportunities to those who would not have them otherwise. Sometimes people may need differing resources to make their opportunities the same as others. That is what equity is. I look at the neighborhoods where Harvest and Redwood sit, and I see one neighborhood that has more resources, more amenities, and where the general area median income is significantly higher. I know while it would be impactful, closing Redwood would not have the disparate negative impact that closing Harvest would. I came into this process with the assumption that Harvest would close and this process was merely a formality. What I have learned through this process, and especially after listening to the Spanish town hall, has led me to challenge that assumption. The feedback from that town hall in particular was a powerful statement of the importance of the school in the neighborhood and as a center of learning, culture, and family. We can and should make Harvest a model school for all, bringing educational equity to students that need the investment. Thank you. As previously stated, public schools serve a greater purpose in our communities as resources, areas of learning, and as places where children can become their full selves. I think it's important to look where we want our district and our city to be in the long term and what will be our legacy. My sincere hope is with brainstorming, scenario planning, dedication, and expertise going into this serious issue of declining enrollment facing the district, that a more holistic approach can be discussed and taken, whether that's evaluating K through 6th at all elementary schools. We only switched 6th grade to middle schools in 2003 in this district, or having a diverse mix of schools going K through 8. We should look at both our successes as well as history of programs that haven't worked to see how we can best structure all of the schools going forward with pillars of equity, diversity, programming excellence, financial solvency, and facility management as our guides. I believe keeping Harvest open and investing in DLI are the most equitable solutions to the problem before us.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Sorry, got off. So we have a couple minutes. Sarah, is there any clarifying questions? We're talking closing Redwood Middle School and potentially adding 6th grade at Puebla Vista, or at least having variety with Napa Valley Language Academy.
Couple of hands. John, go ahead. You can start us off with questions.
Hi, this is John Burton. The question I had from scenario E1, just to clarify, what is community center? And I appreciate Laura's time and effort she took into that, but what is a community center?
Laura, could you briefly clarify that? And Catherine, we'll pause your clock here for 2 minutes.
Sure. I mean, a community center is a place where people gather. So whether it's old classrooms from River, I don't think it needs to be a fancy thing. It's more of the spirit of that. There's been a lot of conversation about creating a DLI academy and in a space at River. And I believe that space, there is definitely space at Harvest for that. And I believe that there are creative solutions to making that a reality there.
I agree with you. And I think that part of community centers should incorporate some of the stuff the superintendent said as well, is that we need to get the city of Napa involved somehow and maybe have some of their resources blend together with the school district to make a community center where children go after school or whatnot and relieve some of the financial issues that parents have with after school daycare. And I'll end that now.
Okay, Sarah, any next question?
Go ahead. Yep, go ahead, Barb.
Thank you for everyone being here today. Am I good? I should be good. I have a couple of questions that I'm curious about with regard to both of the proposals around closing Redwood Middle School. If I look at the numbers, if Redwood Middle School was to close, I'm not sure, given the math, that River School would be able to absorb all of the students that are the resident kids from Redwood Middle School into Harvest. Into the River School. And I would like to think that the district's interest is not to place portables onto a new campus. So I'm curious around that. I think based on my numbers, what they shared, there's about 738 resident kids that attend Redwood Middle School, and that the maximum capacity right now the maximum capacity of River School is around 650 kids. So my question would be, where would those other kids go? And that could potentially create another issue for populations of kids at Redwood Middle School. The second clarifying question I'm interested in is what resources Harvest Middle School has that is different than Redwood Middle School. Certainly with the magnet grant at Harvest Middle School, Harvest had an 8-period day and a tremendous amount of other opportunities for kids. But that has, over the years, gone back to a 6-period day because of the expense of running an 8-period day. So I'm just curious what the different resources are that Redwood has versus Harvest Middle School? Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, for the two questions. So either Catherine or Laura want to address the how the students would be diverted from Redwood Middle School?
So I mean, I guess Barbie too, you could ask the same question of where would the students go from Harvest Middle School. But you know, part of Pueblo Vista used to actually be boundaried down to Harvest just 9 years ago. So I think, you know, it would be split between River, and it would then also come down to Harvest or also go across town to Silverado.
Okay, and the second part of the question?
I think the difference between Harvest and when we're talking about what amenities Harvest has, it's really the connection to the community and what it brings to its community that is important. That situation, you know, location is so important to DLI schools because they do draw from their neighborhoods. They need their neighborhoods in order to make the 50-50 split Spanish English. And in fact, the boundaries around Pueblo Vista are actually quite small. So they can struggle sometimes to get that balance because they're not pulling as much from the neighborhood as they might like. So it's very important for location is really key for DLI schools and their success. And so that it's really about that programming, which is such a strength, and people talk about expanding it, and we're talking about expanding it because it provides such good equity options and diversification options for our schools and for our Latinx community, which is only growing. That population is only growing.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to scenario E3, but again, if there's other questions, we may circle back to you, so be ready. Oh, I guess we're going to scenario F, sorry. Close Harvest Middle School and relocate the dual language immersion program to River Middle School. And I think Kathy, are you presenting on this, or is it?
I am. So my name is Kathy Adams and I'm the principal at River. And this proposal was developed by some of our staff members. So I want to thank the committee for giving River the time and space to present a proposal. River has been part of the Napa community for 26 years at 3 different sites. We currently have 468 students and are expecting 525 for the fall. We are thankful to be at a new site that offers a space for more families to join our community, as well as music rooms, a full-time library, track and field, and science labs for more students. Although the River community is grateful for the new campus, it was not our decision to build this space as a middle school or to move the school. For this scenario, 2 highly valued middle school programs will continue under one roof. The middle school dual immersion students will join with the River students at the new campus on Salvador Avenue. In this proposal, River School will remain either as a school of choice or become a neighborhood school. In addition, we will merge with the dual immersion middle school students and function as one school. To help everyone understand what this will look like, let me take a minute to tell you a little bit more about how River School works and why the program is worth saving. We foster a school-wide program where students have daily advisory period. A student's advisory class is like their school family. All field trips, field days, assemblies, Thanksgiving, celebrations, etc., are coordinated through the advisory class. A student's advisor is their advocate as well as their support person. So at River School, advisory is more than just the 30 minutes at the beginning of each day. It is interwoven in the school-wide framework. The daily advisory meetings allow for relationship building, not just between students, but also between faculty and students. In fact, most students have the same advisor for 2 out of their 3 years. This enables students to have a sense of belonging as well as a sense of self. In addition, River Middle School students are in cohorts of teams and quads. In 6th grade, students have 4 core classes with 2 teachers. Those 2 teachers share the same students exclusively. In 7th and 8th grade, students are in a quad. 4 core teachers share the same students. Each class, except math, has mixed ages of 7th and 8th graders. This unique looping allows for support of 7th grade students as well as leadership roles for 8th grade students. In addition to the added relationship building with teachers, we believe this can benefit all students and would like to include more NVUSD middle schoolers. The vision of our proposal allows for the dual immersion program to also be in quads. Since 2 of their core classes are in Spanish, DI students can have their own quad or quads, allowing students to build those peer and adult relationships. Over time, if the DI program grows, there will be plenty of room to provide for that growth. Our number of students who are DI and non-DI can fluctuate. I believe currently there are about 200 middle school DI students. What matters most to us is that we keep our advisory system, teaching in teams or quads, and we continue to work toward the goal to maintain a school climate and culture that nourishes a strong sense of self and belonging in each student. We are not proposing a shared campus scenario. This is one school merging 2 great programs. Students will share lunch, PE, administration, all facilities, and some classes. This proposal does unfortunately include the closure of one of the other middle schools and likely a redrawing of middle school boundaries. The proposal meets the 4 criteria. In program excellence, the scenario will allow our district to maintain 2 middle school programs that are valued by the Napa community. They are both programs that are in high demand and continue to grow each year. In addition, combining the River Middle School curriculum with the dual immersion education program will benefit both programs. It may bring more interest to the dual immersion program as well. For fiscal solvency, this scenario allows the middle school redesign force to meet its goal of reducing annual ongoing expenditures by $2 million. The River School campus has everything that is needed to welcome the DI students. Responsible facility management. This scenario allows us to fill every seat at the brand new River School campus. Our campus does not require any additional construction or repairs and has an operating budget of about 1.2 million annually. The current maximum capacity is about 630 students. As for equity, adding the dual immersion program to the River Middle School student population will provide more diversity at the River Middle School campus and will distribute resources more equitably amongst NVUSD middle school students. We use the word Hawala, which means awakening of self, to describe what we hope for all of our students. This is done through the building of school culture and climate that the River community would like to expand to more students. Merging the DLI middle school staff and students with the River School staff and students can make for a diverse and dynamic middle school community. Thank you for consideration of this proposal.
Thank you, Kathy. Clarifying questions. Sarah, do we have any?
Yes, go ahead, Nicole.
Hi, I had a quick question. So your capacity is 630, and then you said that there's about 200 DLI students. And next year you're proposing, I think it was 520. So that's over capacity at 728. So now you would be taking less River students. How would we ensure that the DLI is able to continue to thrive and grow, and River would then shrink?
Sure. So we have never controlled the number of students we've been able to take. And I feel that working with the district and getting those 2 programs merged together, we can work on those numbers. So maybe River School shrinks back a little bit as DLI is able to continue to grow. I think we can make it work. Word escapes me. It's a procedural thing. It's, getting it to work for everybody.
Thanks, Nicole. Denise?
I was just curious about the impact on, because the 2 DLI schools, one goes to 6th grade and the other goes to 5th grade. So would we be looking at taking 6th grade away from NVLA, or adding 6th grade to Pueblo Vista and then only having 7th and 8th grade at River?
And that's certainly, I think, an option for us to consider as we figure out how to make this work for everybody, is to make that decision.
And I can speak to the programming part of that, that if, we're looking at, because of the challenges with having only one school send students to middle school, it's either going to be, K-6, dual language, or it's going to be all of them send their sixth graders. It can't be one does and one doesn't. It just creates too many programming issues at the middle school.
That was my concern. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Go ahead, Jen.
Yes, my question was sort of answered already just in regards to the numbers, but just to go back to that real quick, what is the vision for the process to determine open seats in regards to if it's a dual immersion student versus a reverse student? I think the end goal is, increasing diversity and equity. So what would that look like if there are more students than seats? And how can that process be authentic?
Yeah, I agree. We need help making the campus more diverse. And so we think this is a step in the right direction. I also think if we end up drawing the middle school boundaries and River becomes a neighborhood school, and then we factor in for the dual immersion students, I think, again, it's going to take some work, but I think it's doable to do the math and make it work out for both sets of students.
Thanks, Kathy. Oh, I'm sorry,
Sarah,
Dana.
That's okay. We're out of time for questions at the moment. We're going to move on to the last scenario. Okay, this is scenario G. DLI Elementary stays status quo and a creation of a DLI Middle School Language Academy. And I'm going to go ahead and present this on behalf of staff that submitted this scenario in response to some of the feedback from the prior scenarios and the town hall sessions. So in this scenario, sorry, I got to time myself. Oh my gosh. Okay, wearing too many hats, guys. I will take a minute off my time. There we go, 4 minutes.
I can time you, Dana. I'll go ahead and time.
Thanks. So in this scenario, we would close River Middle School and Harvest Middle School. There would be a DLI wall-to-wall middle school language academy created at the former River campus. And the DLI students would have priority enrollment at that campus. In this scenario, NBLA and PV both would be K-5, and they would remain at their current elementary school programs at their sites. And this scenario acknowledges that for now and for the foreseeable future, the city of Napa can accommodate all of its middle school students within the two largest and best equipped middle schools, which are Redwood and Silverado, bifurcating the middle school students roughly into East and West. By repurposing the River Middle School campus as a dual immersion middle school years campus, housing the DI students from 6th grade to 8th grade, we can create a wall-to-wall immersion experience, significantly strengthening the program, which right now we currently see a drop-off in participation in the middle years. The campus has room to grow and house more DI middle school students if elementaries expand, or if another elementary school is added in the future. In the meantime, vacant seats can be offered to students who did not participate in the dual immersion elementary, but who would like to start on the track of learning a second language early in a middle school environment, which celebrates bilingual biliteracy. And mention again that in this scenario, one of the concerns around moving the elementary schools out of the neighborhoods where they recruit for the dual immersion students, that issue is resolved because NBLA would stay where it is, and so would PV. And the students, as you know, start a dual immersion program in kindergarten, not at the middle school years. Also, the worry that there would be nothing left in the community for families to be able to receive services and get support and rally around. We would still have NVLA in the neighborhood. And I just as a reminder that there is also Snow Elementary School in that neighborhood, which is a brand new, beautiful campus in that part of town. So it isn't true that if Harvest was not there, the only thing there is Juvenile Hall. There are also some lovely elementary schools. And Shear is also technically part of the Harvest neighborhood.
Dana, can I add a couple of comments around numbers? So we currently, we did an analysis of our 5th grade cohort, for example. Currently, our upper grades at the 2 elementary feeders would not create a cohort of 200. So to fill the campus, really, we'd be looking at cohorts of approximately 200 to 210 students, correct? To maximize the river facility. Right now, the cohorts that are coming up are smaller cohorts, although we did add a 4th kindergarten at Puebla Vista. So we're making decisions for today, but these are also decisions for the futures. Those kindergartners become middle schoolers very quickly. More quickly than the moms want them to. But we have big cohorts coming in at the kindergarten level, cohorts of 200. This addresses something that we've observed. We just recently presented to the school board around the DLI program, similar to the presentation you all received. And we do see that there is a substantial amount of attrition at the middle school level. And we also looked at the academic data and noted that the English learners at those years are not outperforming other English learners. There are performance struggles at the middle school of our students that are in the DLI program. And that was illuminated at the most recent board meeting, concerns around attrition of the program and student achievement levels and language proficiency levels, and wanting to find a way to sort of strengthen the program by putting the program in a wall-to-wall environment. So the cohorts now wouldn't fill and create that full cohort, but like Dana said, you could offer seats to have students who are interested to fill those seats if they have an interest in language. Assuming 0 attrition with the larger cohorts coming up, the school could be predominantly filled by the DLA students.
Okay, that's our time. Do you have any clarifying questions?
So we'll start with Megan Burton. Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask, I have not been able to see the numbers yet of families that go to private schools when they can't get into a small middle school setting. And so I'm concerned with the idea of only having 2 large campuses where we would be getting equality between them, and kind of that idea, I go back to that equality versus equity, where you've got kids looking over a fence, right? And you've got the different boxes that they're standing on. It feels like all middle school students would be receiving the exact same type of education between the 2 schools with this model. And so I'm wondering, how does this plan account for students and families who need smaller settings in order for their students to be successful?
So what we would be doing is, instead of an emphasis on creating small schools that only a small number of students could attend, we would be putting our resources and energy into developing instructional programs at these schools that replicate and create experiences that are also beneficial for students.
But my concern is that River is the only middle school that seems to have a team approach at this point, where it seems that the other schools have had to withdraw that team approach, and possibly, I'm seeing a shake of a head, so possibly not at Redwood. It's just, it seems like middle school is such a crucial time that if we're going to have only 2 options of middle schools, it seems that we have to make sure that these kids have the supports that they need in smaller cohorts of teachers within the schools. And I would want to see some emphasis on smaller settings supporting those kids.
And those are, programmatic elements that can be looked at. And Mary Ann Christopherson was responding to the idea that they do have teams at Redwood Middle School. I think Mr. Drazel could speak to that, as well as Ms. Christopherson.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next we have Laura Miller. Can I unmute?
Hi, thank you. So question on scenario G, just one thing that stood out for me, I love the wall-to-wall concept and having everyone together in the immersion program, but I'm also not going to overlook the PE facilities. Are they comparable to Silverado and Redwood? I believe there's no pool there, and there's one gym that's smaller scale compared to the other 2 gyms at the other schools. I know we'd have a smaller enrollment of students, but I do not want to do anything that would jeopardize hindering physical activity for any of our students moving forward. And I'm just curious as to if there are any plans at River to increase the access for sports or PE instruction and things such.
Mike, do you want to respond to what the facility has? You'd be better positioned for that.
Yeah, so thanks, Laura. So, the site sits on approximately 9 acres. And the way the school was designed was to have the one multi-purpose room or gymnasium, as we have it, which is a fairly large gymnasium. It's not as large as Silverado or Redwood is, and it wasn't designed to be that way. It also has an asphalt track and a field, so it's not the synthetic track that you have at Harvest, Silverado, or Redwood. But given the size of the campus that it would be, at 630 students, I think that at a maximum capacity of that, I think that the gymnasium and the locker rooms adequately serve that particular campus. When Silverado and Redwood and Harvest, which is the oldest campus, received the second gymnasium, at that time you had campuses of anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 students. So there definitely was a need to see a second gymnasium on those particular campuses. But now at this point, not sure that would be the recommendation from the school district would be to put a second gymnasium on school campuses, given the size of the middle schools that they are. And I think River being at a maximum of 630, if you calculate that over, six periods, you're looking at approximately, 5 periods, you're looking at approximately about 120 to 150 students, about 120 students per period to take PE, which the gymnasium could easily adequately support.
As far as the pool though, Mike, I mean, for me, it's not just PE, but for safety issues. Many people in underprivileged areas, their children's first time in a swimming pool is that introduction at school. And is there a plan to potentially put a pool in at Harvest? It's beyond just the physical activity. It's really about equity. I mean, we were creating a big equity issue with the Performing Arts Center issue. And to me, a pool is going to be just as important as far as physical activity and safety for our kids.
There's no plan to put a pool at River Middle School at all. I also would probably, put my principal's hat back on as being a former middle site principal and let you know that a couple things have to happen to even have swimming lessons or having people in a pool. And number one, you have to have PE teachers that are WSI certified, so water safety instructor certified, before you can put anybody in a pool to begin with. So if you do not have PE teachers that do not have that WSI certification, then putting anybody in a pool is a moot issue. You can have the nicest pool in the world, but you got to put somebody. You have to have somebody on deck who has that certification. I think the second thing is that you're looking at the pools that putting in a pool and the amount of use that they do get. There is a certain period of time that the pools will not be used by middle school students, just because there's not a competition or a competitive nature to it, as such as you see it at the high schools, where they have year-round swim programs and water polo programs. So we would need to really study the use of what the pool would be at those sites. I think if you go back and look at when, and I'm going to reference Ridgeview again, but when you go back and look at when Ridgeview was built, when Silverado was built, and when Redwood was built, they were built to serve students in grades 7 through 10. And at that point, they were also then you had the CIF or I think we were in the North Coast section, but transitioned to the San Joaquin section at some point, where where high school sports were conducted on the middle school campuses, and so they required a facility such as a pool to have for competitive swimming to happen on those campuses. That's not the case anymore. So yes, you can make the argument around equity. I'm not going to argue that point at all. But I think at the end of the day, it boils down to the use of a particular facility, and does it make sense from a cost-effective standpoint to build a particular facility.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go ahead. It is 7:13, and we really want to give you plenty of time in your small groups. I think there should be enough information about the scenarios to understand essentially what we're proposing in all these different scenarios. You also have the ones from last time. So at this point, we're getting ready to release you into your small groups to get back to work and dig into those scenarios using the guiding principles. And we are using these guiding principles as we have been from the beginning. And this is again a snapshot of the recording sheet that your facilitators of your small groups will be helping to fill in based on your input. It is the stoplight code. I know you guys all have this down, but red is does not meet goal. Yellow means partially meets goal, and green is it meets the goal. Sarah, do you want to say anything before we launch into small groups?
Just quickly that the new scenarios have been added to both the chart that the facilitators are going to be using during the small group time and to the participant guide. Also the new data from this evening has been tacked onto the bottom of the participant guide from scenario or from session 4. So you have all the data and the new scenario snapshots in the participant guide, which is the same one that you had last time. It's just been updated with the current scenarios. If you don't have it handy, your facilitator will drop it into the chat once you get to your small group Zoom session.
I also just want to add for people who are not part of the task force, but those who are kind of following along at home, this process, that the task force, all the participants had received copies of the emails that were sent to the task force email. So they had all of that feedback to read through. Many of them were present during the town hall meetings. And they also received these new scenarios that were submitted. They received the written scenario information as well. So I just want to remind committees that you have all that at your disposal, and let people know who are viewing that you guys had all that information as well.
And Dana, sorry to interrupt, just one last reminder that we are going to be asking small groups to return promptly at 8:15 so that small groups can have, the facilitators can have a chance to report out on the work that was done in the small groups.
Okay. So with that, this is always the part that makes me nervous. We're going to have you find your link to go into your small group and hope we don't lose anybody along the way.
And if anybody needs the link, email to them. You can unmute and let me know, and I can email it to you directly.
Please email to Laura. Thanks.
I'll do that right now, Laura.
Thank you.
Laura, just refresh my memory what group you're in quickly.
I'm pretty sure it's D.
D. Okay, thanks. You should be receiving it in your email now, Laura.
Welcome back, everyone. How are we doing on getting our participants back here? Let's see.
There's still about 20 to come, but they're coming.
Okay. So I guess while we're waiting for people to come back in here, I just wanted to share, as I had made a note for myself to share a theme that was also in the emails, but I don't think I remember to say it. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge that there was a repeated theme from participants in the town hall, as well as emails of people expressing their gratitude for the work of the task force here, and acknowledging the many hours of volunteer time that you have given to participate in these meetings, to prepare, to think about these scenarios and about this information. Many of you submitted scenarios, and I just want to echo that as the commentators have also greatly appreciated your work in the sense that they understand how complex and how challenging this has been. And again, thank you. And just want you to know that your diligence and thoughtfulness has not gone unnoticed by the participants in the town halls and also through email. So with that, Sarah, do we have, are we ready to start with facilitator reports?
I think that we should just start. I'm seeing a couple of people trickling in still, but I think we should get moving.
Yeah, so Sarah, can you just remind everybody of the prompt for our facilitator report share outs?
Yes. So we're asking the facilitators to share out how far you got in terms of the work of comparing each of the scenarios to the guiding principles. And if possible, if you were able to reach a consensus on a scenario that most closely met all of the one that most met all of the guiding principles, that would be a viable option moving forward, then you can share that out. If not, and if you weren't able to get through all of the scenarios, give us a status update and where you were able to get to, and also, a timetable of how much more time you might need if you were not able to complete all of the tasks. So we'll go ahead and start with the facilitator from Group A, which is Elizabeth.
Okay, so we got to very last minute, through all of them. We color coded and had some discussion around them. The question we kind of landed on, or two scenarios, G and C, because with one we had 2 red and 2 green in the rubric, and in G we had 1 green, 3 yellow. So I don't know if we blend the colors, if that's going to end up being the same. So I think we're looking more towards C, but we definitely needed a little more time.
About how much more time do you think, Elizabeth, your group would need to get that final step?
I felt a little rushed, like maybe 5 minutes, just so we could make sure we didn't miss anybody and everyone was comfortable.
Okay.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
All right, so we're gonna move on to Group B.
Hi, everyone. So Group B is able to move forward with a recommendation of scenario G. However, when you look at the chart, you would expect to see all greens, and you don't. You see 2 yellows and 2 greens. And so under program excellence, everyone's in agreement that dual immersion provides powerful programming, but the team needed assurance that our English learner population would still benefit from that program excellence based on it being at the River site. In terms of fiscal solvency and responsible facility management, those were really easy to come to conclusions as being green for the obvious dollar savings and maximizing capacity at the newest facility, River. E, equity, was yellow in that, we all want to know that our Latinx population will have access to the site and be provided with the resources that they need to actualize the equity. We see it as being the equity, but we have some concerns about the need to actualize that, and that would be assurances around busing, before and after care, a late bus, and whatever else that community needed to get there to benefit from that program. That's our report.
Thanks, Stephanie. We can jump to Group C.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Group C for their thoughtful discussion. We were able to start off with the newer scenarios and make our way through the majority of them, reviewing and discussing and assessing, but we still need more time to look at probably 3 or 4 more options. So I would say about 30 more minutes.
Thanks, Monica, for that update. We'll go to Group D.
So we were able to get through the first scenarios. And so we haven't even addressed the last 4 scenarios. And our group is requesting another hour session just to be able to dive deeper and we would be able to discuss and get through it. So we need more time to process.
All right, thank you, Carlisa. Going to Group E.
Thank you. So we were able to get through session E1. So we have, I believe, 3 more sessions, 3 more scenarios to move through. And I would say that we need about 30 more minutes to complete that process. Good conversation with our group. And there was some questions about some of the programs at the other middle schools that came up. A desire for more information about the programs at some of our other middle schools beyond Harvest.
Thanks, Matt.
Matt, just to clarify, 30 minutes to get all the way to the end or 30 minutes to review the next?
30 minutes to get through the end.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. All right, moving to Group F.
Yeah, so Group F, similarly to some of the other groups, we were able to get through many of the scenarios, the 4 original ones plus the E's. We still need to get through F and G. And so I would imagine we need about half an hour to give that time and space it needs to be able to make a firm decision. And thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And Group G.
Yeah, we were able to make it all the way to scenario G, where we're in the beginning of our conversation there before our time ended. So I think in order for us to complete our task and make a recommendation, we probably need another 15 to 20 minutes.
Thanks, Susan.
And that's all the groups, correct, Sarah?
Correct.
All right. Okay. All right, so just to recap and talk about next steps, between session 4, when you first poured over the scenarios until now, you have really been dedicated and engaged in a thorough analysis, problem solving, and debate. You've attended 2 virtual town halls, read dozens of emails, and in some cases created and submitted proposals, and are now considering up to 10 scenarios. So I have to say you all look a little tired right now, and I can see why, because this has been a lot of work and a lot of thinking. As you emerge from your small groups and kind of come to the surface at the end of this session, after this deep dive into the work, I just want you to take a big relaxing breath, because you have worked hard and you've done some tremendous work and thinking. So next session, we'll continue any remaining analysis that needs to be done. It sounds like there may be a need for some differentiation in terms of time. So Sarah and I can connect and figure out how we might be able to provide more or less time for the groups so that you can bring that work to a close. And I just want to say that although we started as 50 individuals wearing multiple hats and having different experiences and opinions, we do hope to have a collective recommendation from a united task force by 8:30 on April 6th, which is our next meeting. So I thank you for your time and your talent and your energy that you've given to this work. And I just say thank you and good night. Take care and be well. Until next time.